is ended. The Atari 8-bit podcast.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kay Savetz. Bob Puff is the owner of Computer Software Services, a company that began creating hardware and software for the Atari 8-bit computers in 1982. Bob became president of the company in 1991. He designed a bevy of hardware products for the Atari computers, including the Black Box, a hard drive host adapter, the Multiplexer, a networking system, the UltraSpeed Plus operating system upgrades for the XF551 floppy drive, the Super-E Burner EPROM burner, and others. He also created a number of popular utility programs, including BobTerm, a terminal program, Disk Communicator to convert boot disks to a single compressed file for transfer over a modem, and MYDOS 4.53, among other software. This interview took place on April 27th, 2021.
When I was young, I used to ride my bike down to the local Radio Shack store, which was just down the street from me, and I would mess around with their TRS-80 computers. They had the TRS-80 Model 3, I think, and I would mess around and kind of learn BASIC and write some programs on that. And my parents saw that I had an aptitude for computers, so they talked to someone in our church who worked on Apple computers. So I went over to his house, I would say like once a week or so, and he was showing me on the Apple II how to program in BASIC and write some programs. Not sure actually what my age was at that time, but it was fairly young. And then again, my parents saw that things were going well with that, and so they talked with the gentleman, and he had recommended get a Atari computer for me. So one Christmas, probably was for Christmas of that year, and my parents got me an Atari 800 with 16K and the BASIC cartridge. I think that was it. I had no I/O at the time, so I messed around and I'm trying to think of how I did get information back then, because that was certainly prior to any internet or CompuServe being available. But I was able to find some articles anyways on how the cassette recorder worked. And so I rigged up a little interface, at least to save programs. And I think a few months later, I was able to finally buy a 410 Atari cassette recorder. So I was able to actually save my programs. Other than that, I was just leaving the computer on and messing with it. So that was kind of how I got my start with the Ataris. And that was probably 1981, I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. 81 or 82, somewhere around there.
Well, you started the company in 1982, I believe. So
no. Actually, Computer Software Services was started by another gentleman, Ron Yesterby.
Wow.
And so I actually was not in contact with him until later on.
How did you meet Ron?
That was further down the road.
Okay.
After I had written a number of programs. I was working on the 810 disk drive, and I had disassembled the operating system of that and was studying that and looking into different like protection techniques and things like that. And I came up with the idea that led to actually what was called a phantom sector maker. Mm-hmm. So I modified some code in the OS and added some hardware and was able to come up with a reliable phantom sector on a single density disk that could be used even to the point where you could have solid data in half the sector and random data in the second half. And so I was thinking, well, who could I take this to? Who could use this? And I had remembered seeing ads in the various Atari magazines of computer software services, and they were local to me, also in the Rochester area. So I called the gentleman and talked to him, and ended up taking it to him and doing a demo, and that kind of started the relationship I had with computer software services.
Cool. All right, so I feel like I inadvertently jumped way ahead. How do we get from being a person with only a basic cartridge to knowing how to make phantom sectors and things?
Right.
How did you...
Yeah. So just over the years, I mean, I was still in school. I had a lot of time on my hands when I wasn't doing schoolwork. I would mess around with the computer, and so I got a assembler editor cartridge. That was probably shortly after I got my computer, and all I had was the reference manual that came with it. I had no other documentation or books to understand how assembly language worked, and so I just studied that, and it was probably a good year before I actually was able to write a program, and kind of all of a sudden it kind of dawned on me what's going on here and how this all fits together. So I started writing small amounts of code in assembler and embedded that into my basic programs. Meanwhile, I think, or in a parallel fashion, the bulletin board system kind of came to the forefront, and I got a modem. I started with a 300 baud modem, so I was getting online and checking out various BBSs, and kind of got the bug to wanting to write my own. So I started writing one in BASIC, and then later on kind of started involving more assembly language into it, and then kind of blossomed out from there. So that kind of opened me up to more people and collaborating with other people on some projects and learning a whole lot more that way. One of the first programs that I wrote was actually a program that would allow you to increase the bit rate of cassette recorder saves. So normally I think it was 600 baud that the Atari used to save on cassettes, and the Antic magazine, which was popular back then, kept promising they were going to tell how to make it faster, how to make it how to do that, and they never did. So I figured out finally how to do that, and was able to increase it to 820 baud. But by that time, disk drives, the 810s, and I'm not sure if even the 1050 was around at that point, but it was certainly easier and quicker to use a disk drive. So that little project kind of fell by the wayside. But that was the first kind of major project that I had done, and I think I might have even sent it to Antic, but again, by that time people were kind of past cassettes. I got into, like I say, the BBS stuff. That also is where I started writing a terminal program and came up with BobTerm, which was a very successful shareware program that I did at that time.
I'm familiar with BobTerm from back in the day. How did that do as a shareware program? Did people actually pay for it?
Yeah, quite a few. I'm not exactly sure how many. It's been such a long time. I did have records back then. I would say probably maybe 1 out of every 50 people sent something in. So it wasn't a lot, but it was. I had got a lot of encouraging notes from people, and so that was really neat. And just hearing from various people all over the world, really. Most of them were in the United States, but I did receive a few things from Germany, because obviously there was a large contingent of Atari users in Germany, as well as a couple other countries.
Nice. Was that kind of an inkling that this Atari community was a global thing? Or were you just happy to deposit the checks?
I think I had seen a lot of things in magazines about that, but I remember getting a letter from the ABBUC, which is, at least back then, that was like one of the large Atari groups in Germany, saying that they wanted to distribute BobTerm, and I thought that was really cool. So yeah, that was really neat to see that. and that I had not been exposed to before. I just read about some things every once in a while in a magazine.
Nice. The ABBUC still exists and is still the largest Atari computer club there is.
Neat. Okay.
So tell me about some of your other early projects.
I'm trying to think here now.
I mean, I have a list of things, but I don't know really what order things came in. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to be real familiar either. I know certainly getting on the online community, bulletin boards, and then later on, I think I started on Genie. I was on that for a little bit, and then they approached me to become like one of the sysops there, and then later on CompuServe did the same thing, because back then those were pay services, and so you had to pay to be on it.
Right.
It was kind of neat to be a part of those communities, and I saw the need for being able to transfer whole disks. So I wrote a program called Discom, DISKCOM, and then that was originally actually in compiled BASIC with some assembly, and then later on I did a full assembly version, which is probably the last version that's out there. Because there was a local guy here who had written a program to do the same thing, and so I thought, well, I think I can do a little bit better job and make the files smaller. So I came up with like different algorithms to compress the data. This was before zip or ARC. So yeah, we came out with that. About ARC, I'm trying to remember back to that. I remember I had purchased an IBM PC computer clone from a company that made digital signage, and they were getting rid of all their old hardware. So I found I had got one that was I think it was an 8088 processor. It was definitely one of the originals. I think I had the full 640K of RAM and a EGA monitor. And so I kind of started to delve a little bit into some of the PC stuff, and I saw the ARC program was used to compress programs and combine files together. And so I knew there really wasn't anything out on the Atari for that. I think right around the same time Alf Crunch came out by Alfred up in Canada, and so I thought, well, let's see if I can do something with this. So I disassembled Alf's program and figured out what it was doing, and then I looked up the ARC source and tried to understand what it was doing, as it was written in C, and I had never done anything in C before, so I was kind of struggling to figure out what it was, but it was a fairly simple algorithm. Thankfully, I had the PC there that I could compose files and then kind of see if I could decrypt them or decode them properly. Decompress, thank you. Yeah. So that helped out a bit, and so I was able to. I think that actually the first try of the code that I had written from trying to figure out what the C was doing actually worked, and I was like, wow, that's incredible. So then I just kind of worked on making it faster and just doing a lot of crunching of just the code just to try to make it run as fast as possible, because that's one of the big deals of running on a 6502 processor that's running an effective 1 megahertz is you've got to make every cycle count. And so the more I got into the assembly stuff, the more I kind of learned some tricks of how to keep that execution as fast as possible. I remember Alf got a hold of me and called me up. He goes, "So you beat me up my own game," meaning because the SuperArc actually would uncrunch Alf's files faster than his own program would. So we actually developed a good friendship and relationship, which we still talk to this day.
Nice.
So it was kind of cool.
So that just seems amazing to me that you went from basically never having done anything with compression to learning about the algorithms by decompiling and looking at the source code of other programs, and then got it working and then went straight into optimization. Holy cow.
Yep. And in fact, I right now, just to jump way ahead, I'm working on an audio mixing program which takes digital audio, hundreds of channels of digital audio, and processes them. And actually, I started using an assembler on it, and this same principles still apply. I'm still doing the same crunching. I'm just counting every cycle of every instruction and trying to figure out how to save a cycle here or there. The same techniques I learned back with the 8-bit processors.
Wow. Keep going. What was next?
Somewhere in the middle, so we're jumping around a little bit here, but I was asked to speak at a couple of user groups in various places. There was one, I think it was called SPACE, SPACE, and it was in the Midwest.
The St. Paul Atari something.
Yeah, St. Paul, Minnesota, you're right. Yep.
Computer enthusiasts, that was the C.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, so I was out there. They invited me to come out, so I went out to that. And there was another one in Michigan. We actually attended a couple shows. This was once I was a part of Computer Software Services, so this is a little bit more fast forward, but I enjoyed going out and meeting people. I was deathly scared initially of doing that because I was more of an introvert, but it was neat. I remember being at the first meeting of, I'm not sure which group it was. It might have been Space, but just very, very nervous ahead of time. But once I got in there and people started asking me questions, it's like this is cool. They're just normal people, and it was a really neat experience. Later on, I became a part of Computer Software Services, doing work for them, and I developed several products, mostly to deal with I/O, so disk drives, the Super Archiver, I believe it was for the 1050 drive, did the XF update for the XF551, and then I remember Supra came out with a hard drive interface, and so I was able to get hold of one of those systems, and we had a local computer junk store, I guess you might call it, that had a lot of old hardware they would sell very inexpensively. So I was able to get hold of this great big 8-inch quantum hard drives that were, I think it was like 6 megs, maybe 12 megs. They had 120-volt motors that would drive the platters. And then they had a big controller board, which was about the size of the drive itself, that provided the SASE interface. And so I actually put together a hard drive system. I thought, well, this is really cool. I was able to just, be able to load and save and boot really fast. I looked at how they were interfacing it and then came up with some ideas of how to make that better. And MIO came out, saw that, got one of those. Again, kind of went through it and just saw what it was doing and just tried to improve upon that. And that's where the black box came from. And that was a very successful device that we sold quite a few of. I wanted to make debugging tools part of that, just because I use these tools so much of just things that I had designed for myself for debugging programs. So a lot of that actually went into the black box. In fact, we added an extra part where another gentleman had made a disk editor that we incorporated in. That I just thought that was just a neat way to have all your tools kind of in one basket.
Who do you think was using the black boxes? My sense was that it was mostly like people running BBSs and stuff. Were there business owners, you think, that were using their Ataris with a lot of storage?
I don't know. A lot of the people I talked to certainly were BBS owners. But I also talked with a lot of programmers. So they all had hard drive systems, and most of them were using the black box, I think. But I really didn't have that much of a pulse on business use of the Atari, just because I was dealing more with the hardware and the low-level stuff. Didn't really get too much into the software area. Where I did is we actually did have a local radio station that wanted to get their traffic updates from another company that was doing this. They had put together some sort of system where they had a modem that would dump right to a printer, and so the guy that was doing the traffic updates, he would call with his modem, log in, and do this dump to them, and it would print out. And for whatever reason, it wasn't working all that well. So I made a little system that kind of like a very cut down BBS, I guess you could say, where they would just, it was a bootable system, so they would just be a standalone. You just turn it on, and it would have a modem, and you connect to a printer, and it would kind of handshake a little bit more so with the gentleman that was doing the traffic updates, and it would be able to like store things on there and then print it. They used that for quite a few years, I believe. So that was one of the few business type of applications that I did. But again, I really wasn't that much into working with businesses on software. That actually came a lot later.
Sure. You had a product called the Pill. Do you want to talk about that?
That was not by me. That was prior to my association with Computer Software Services.
Okay.
So there were a few different items. The Pill, the Impossible, that was another one. Those were basically cartridge backup devices.
Right. So that was not really you. Right. And there's also the Super Pill later, which was...
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the Super Pill. Yep.
You also had your hand in some backup devices, right? Especially for disk.
The Super Archiver was probably that was probably it. And I was intrigued more of how they did these different protection techniques. Like how to put more than 18 sectors on a track. And so I had some ideas, and like one of my ideas was, well, what if they're on the MFM disk format, which is what actually no, I believe it's FM was used for single density, MFM was used for double density. But anyways, on the FM disk format that was used for the Atari 810 and whatever else in single density, they would have these special bytes called address marks. I believe they're address markers, and that would identify like where a sector started, and it had a certain bit pattern that would made it stick out to the controller, so the controller knew, okay, this is a sector versus just data. And I was thinking, well, I wonder if they're doing something like putting these inside of actual data. And so I put together some hardware that I could actually store a whole track worth of data on the computer and then dump that really quickly to the disk drive, so I could write essentially a whole track of data of anything I wanted. So I was able to kind of mess around, and indeed that was what they were doing to get these 23 and 24 sector tracks that were used in protection, because you can't write those with any normal disk controller. So those kind of things intrigued me, and that's how I kind of learned what was going on. Just a lot of experimental stuff, a lot of trial and error. Actually, that ended up becoming a product called the BitWriter. We sold all that we made. It wasn't that many, because the gentleman didn't really think it was going to be that high of a selling item, and so we didn't make that many. Maybe made a couple hundred. And I don't actually have any of those. I haven't had any of those for many years. All I have is my prototype still here, where I had all these tips on a breadboard and made it work.
Wow. Where did you fall in the piracy / backing up field? Do you feel like that you were helping people be dirty pirates, or were you helping people make legit backups, or how was that going?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I can give you a full explanation of where my brain was at that point. I know that, again, I think to me it was more of a challenge, not so much trying to defraud anyone. And there certainly were obviously legitimate reasons for having backups of things, because I had disks fail.
Sure.
And so I certainly saw the need for that. Certainly, you could view a lot of these programs as being, ways to pirate stuff. That wasn't my goal, certainly. But again, I think I was in it more for the challenge of how do you, if someone says, well, you can't do this, then that's a challenge to me. So if you say I can't do it, I'm going to find a way to do it. And so that's how a lot of these things came to be, really. Not even so much in just protection techniques, but networking, like using the multiplexer. People say, well, you can never have a network on an 8-bit Atari. When I was designing that, I was reading in one of the data sheets of the one of the chips I was using that the method I wanted to use, it said it couldn't do it, that it was past a certain spec, and I'm like, oh no. And so I messed around and I got it to work. So I think a lot of the stuff I did was for the challenge.
Nice. So the multiplexer allowed you to have multiple computers connected to one hard drive or floppy drive, is that right?
Yes. So there was a master computer that had your hard drive or whatever peripherals you wanted to share. It was pretty much just a hard drive thing. I'm not sure if it did printing as well. It's possible it may have had printing in there, but you could share that, and up to 8 slave computers would then be able to even boot off of the master hard drive.
Nice. Was this used in education? Who was doing this?
I believe there were some schools that were using that. For the majority of the use, I think it was for BBSs. Because for BBSs, if you wanted to have a multi-line bulletin board, you would need multiple modems and multiple computers.
Right.
So I added a way that you can share data between different computers, some kind of thing I think I called pipes. At least my BBS that I had written, I just called it the Puff BBS made use of that. So if someone was on the first line and then another user called on the second line, they could actually see that someone was on the first one, they could chat with them. And that was all through the multiplexer.
Any other projects come to mind, or should I start listing things that may or may not be?
For it, because you'll probably remember more than I will.
Okay, let's see. There was, you did a translator program called XLFix.
That was not mine.
Really? See, there's a lot of bad information out there. That's really funny.
Right. Yeah, the XLFix, that was prior to, that was another, I think, computer software services, because
I see.
I was not the only one that wrote programs for them.
Sure.
There were some other guys. That was, by the time I came, after a year or two, I pretty much was it. But yeah, there were definitely people prior to me.
The floppy board to use industry standard drives?
The floppy board, that was the last product that I created, and that was an add-on to the black box. So when we made the black box, I had that in mind, that I really wanted to come out with a floppy interface, but at the time it wasn't cost-effective. So I just basically stuck a connector in a header with different signals that I thought that I might need, and some that I thought I just in case type of connectors, or signals I should say, that I put on those pins, and kind of hope for the best that when that time came that I would have everything I needed. And for the most part, it actually did work out. So by the time I did have the resources to be able to create the floppy board, we were able to make a board that would just sandwich on top of the black box, still fit into an actual case that we had made for the black box. And that allows you to connect floppies and be able to read and write disks a whole lot faster.
Neat. So you weren't married to just using the Atari branded drives?
Correct. No, you had to use just a standard PC type of drive,
right.
And then you could use the 5 1/4s, you could use the 3 1/2s, and it would also do, I believe it did high density. I'm trying to think if it did high density or not. I'm not actually sure. I think it did.
It's been a minute. It's okay if you don't remember. It's all right.
It has been it's been a couple minutes actually.
Okay, the US Plus operating system. Tell me about that.
UltraSpeed Plus. Yeah. So that was actually combining a number of different modifications that I had done to the standard XL operating system. Some of it being like the faster UltraSpeed drivers. That was the big one. So that if you had a modified 1050 with either the doubler or our Super Archiver, you get faster speed. If you had the XL551, you get faster speed. I believe there were some other little tweaks in that. I don't recall right now all of what they were, but that was pretty much what I had used as a programming tool, and we ended up making a product out of it. I believe that also incorporated. I think that incorporated the older 400, 800 operating system that you just mentioned before with the product name.
Oh,
that I did not do.
The XL Fix.
The XL Fix, yeah. I'm pretty sure we ended up taking the XL Fix and putting that into a section of the ROM as well. So you had a switch that you could switch back and forth between 3 operating systems. One was the stock operating system, the XL Fix for the 400, 800 compatibility, and then the UltraSpeed operating system.
Nice. And how did you pronounce that product? You said it differently than I did. You called it just the UltraSpeed Plus, or?
I believe it was UltraSpeed Plus.
Okay. The best name for any Atari product, the Quintupus.
I did not come up with that name. That was the other owner. Someone asked if they could plug multiple SIO devices in and be able to switch them, and so we came up with 1 in, 5 out, and that's where the 5 or the quint came from.
Sure.
The quint.
And because some of the devices had to be the last one on the chain, for instance, the 410 tape drive, and if you wanted 2 of those last devices, then you couldn't do it without some tweaking, some hardware.
Exactly. Yeah. So, the basic one was simply pretty much just everything was in parallel, but then we had a switchable version, which was a little interesting because we needed to switch several signals, and so I had to do some research to find just the right chips to use so that we could have just a toggle switch that would switch a number of the signals altogether. And actually in my pile of stuff that I still have here, we have quite a few that are using some of the old CMOS 4066 chips, which were not good. They had too high of resistance and did not work properly, but they had got built up and soldered in, so it's kind of a pain to have to desolder them and put the chips that we ended up finally using in there that worked better. That was a device that I didn't really see that much of a use for, but apparently other people did, and we did sell quite a few.
Cool. You mentioned your pile of stuff a couple times. Do you still sell these products?
Well, I've got we've got 3,500 square feet office right now, and I've got a small section of that that is my Atari section. So we still have a few items that are still ready for sale, but I believe it's only things like the XF. No, what was it called? Not the XF Fix. Oh, maybe it is. It was for the XF551 to allow you to hook up a different drive. I think there was an XF something. There were two updates for that.
I see the XF 551 enhancer, and then there was the
dual drive upgrade.
Right.
Yeah. I think we may have a couple of those still here, but apart from that, I just have a lot of parts.
Sure. I was unclear because I love that you still have a kind of a legacy website for computer software services online, and thank you for that. And there's a price list, but it's hard to know, if that price list hasn't been updated in 20 years or if the products are still there. So. Yeah. Unfortunately, I every once in a while I do get a call from someone, and I pretty much have to say I'm sorry, man. I don't really have any product I can put you on a list, and if there is enough interest at some point, we potentially could make a run of something, but it's a little tough these days. But what I did find rather interesting is I did find some Atari machines that we ended up selling on eBay, and they actually went for more than they were back in the 90s. So apparently there is a definite resurgence and a demand for some of the original Atari stuff. Yeah.
Most of what I have in my pile are prototype versions of the various products.
Well, normally at this point in the conversation, I start begging people to release source code and stuff. But you've done that. I mean, like a long time ago. Like all the source code that you found, it looks like is already available.
Some of it is been disassembled from my code. Not all the source code that's out there is necessarily from me, but it's out there. So yeah.
Nice.
I tend to hold a little bit more of that, although I guess in the past years, people have said, well, hey, we disassembled this. Do you care? And I'm like, well, probably not. Certainly, it's not like we're going to be making any money from it anymore at this point. But I don't. Maybe I could with a resurgence. I don't know. What I did find rather interesting is I did see an article where someone tried to reverse engineer the discom format. And I looked at that and I'm like, well, they're close, but they actually missed a whole section of stuff that is in there. At this point, releasing some of the code would actually be difficult because most of the, a couple hard drives that I had all my source code on, I know at least one of them suffered some loss and I can't read anything from it anymore. So I actually don't have a lot of the code here anymore. Dig up a couple of 5 1/4 and 8-inch discs as I was moving some things somewhat recently, and haven't fired them up, but it's quite possible that they might have a number of things on them.
Exciting. Well, I'm glad that you still have the hardware to check that out if you get the time.
Yeah.
Neat.
Yeah.
Tell me about what your company does now, New Life Electronics.
Yeah. So New Life Electronics we started off doing IT support, so kind of more into the current range of computers and operating systems. Also, one of the projects I've been working on for the past few years that I'm hopefully going to be coming out with shortly is a audio digital mixer that is based on a PC. So the computer itself is doing all the audio processing, and then I have other computers that are doing the control for that. So that's combined a lot of things, because I actually also, part of what New Life Electronics does is audio-video design and installation. So we've gotten into pretty much any aspect of audio that there is, from recording to live to design to hardware with amplifiers, modifying mixers, the whole gamut. So I'm actually combining a lot of that knowledge of hardware with software. Coming out with a product that pretty much is the equivalent of some of the $100,000 plus mixers that are on the market currently, but all done virtually.
How cool. So at what point did Computer Software Services shut down, or did it just sort of become your new company?
Computer Software Services never officially shut down. That's still a company that I own. Mm-hmm. I started doing more of the audio and IT services just under the New Life Electronics name. We have both.
Sure. You had a product called the Super-E Burner, I believe.
Yes. So in doing hardware with the computers, and this is actually dating back quite a ways, I needed to be able to burn ICs, burn EPROMs. Mm-hmm. So again, read the Datus books on how it's supposed to work, and I built up some hardware to attempt to do that, and had some success. I end up having to develop a different algorithm to program chips than what was in the books, and I'm not sure really why that was, because I tried some of I think they had a quick pulse algorithm that some of the chips were supposed to be using to be able to burn them quickly. I never could get that to work, but I ended up developing my own pulsing algorithm that seemed to work very well on burning chips. So I had that for a number of years just in my own prototype equipment, and that's what I was using to burn chips. And finally, the owner of Computer Software Services came to me and said, hey, can we make a product out of this? And I'm like, okay, sure. So kind of added on because mine just used a lot of switches, so I could only burn, I think it was 8K at a time. So came up with a way to not have to use all the switches to burn larger chips, and that became the Super-E Burner.
Neat. What other projects did you do Atari-wise that you would like to talk about that we haven't yet? I see a bunch of modem handlers, and maybe you were involved with MYDOS at one point.
Let's see, MYDOS. That's kind of a fun one. MYDOS that came with, I think it was the RANA drives.
Yes, I believe so. I think so. That was SmartDOS.
SmartDOS. SmartDOS came with one of them. Yeah, I'm not sure where. MYDOS came with something, I thought. Anyways, I ended up using that because it was a fairly low memory footprint, so you had a little bit more free RAM to use, and so that was kind of my DOS of choice when I was doing development. And there were a few little things here and there that I was hoping to see fixed at some point in time. So I did some research and was able to get hold of Charles Marslet, who was the one that wrote it. And very nice gentleman. Spoke to him, and he had at that time moved on to other projects. And I said, "Hey, do you mind if I get the source code for this and kind of try and improve it?" And he's like, "No, sure, go for it." So he sent me the source code to it. I think that was version 4.50 at the time. I dug through that and made some modifications and came up with the MYDOS 4.53, which I believe was the last one that actually I messed with, which incorporated all the modifications that I had seen for different bug fixes. And the other thing that I had envisioned was to be able to have larger than 16 megabyte partitions. And I believe I had put the code into the DOS for that, but I'm not actually sure now if that happened. It's been a while. But that was one of my other things that I had thought about later on when we were dealing with large hard drives.
Mm-hmm. Neat.
So that was neat.
What haven't I asked you about your Atari days that I should have?
The time when I purchased the company, Computer Software Services, from the former owner, was we had just got news that the 8-bit was being discontinued.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a bit of sad news, and I had looked into potentially doing something with the ST series, but never did. I got one and messed around with it a little bit, but it was just such a departure from the 8-bit that I just didn't feel that was going to be a viable option.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time, IBMs and clones were certainly becoming a lot more popular.
Did you feel like you had made a horrible mistake by acquiring this company that was going to be supporting an obsolete product? Or was it a horrible mistake or not?
I don't think it was, but certainly the thought crossed my mind. I believe the announcement came after I had purchased the company, and I thought, that's interesting. So we definitely had a number of good years following that before sales started tapering off.
If you could send a message to the people who still use their Atari computers today, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I guess some people use computers to accomplish tasks. Other people use computer. I think that's kind of what happens these days. Is it's a tool. We get on the internet. We write things in word processors. We use spreadsheets. So it's a tool now. I think one of the things about the 8-bit is it was more of a hobby and more of an enjoyment type of thing because you could actually understand how things worked. You could enjoy the programs, the games, and it was kind of neat to be able to write programs that were easy to use, easy to write, I should say. Whereas now it's a lot more complex. I'm not sure if that's something I would want to say to everyone, but I'm just saying I think that this that it was certainly a unique period of history, and I can understand why people like to go back to that, because in a way it's almost like times were a little bit more simple. Mm-hmm. Now there's no way you can understand how Windows works.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I know you said you had some equipment around. When was the last time you fired up an Atari computer?
I fired up an Atari computer probably a couple of months ago, as I needed to. What was I doing? I was doing something with an EPROM chip. I needed to either duplicate or burn an EPROM that I had the data saved for. I believe it was for a telephone system. I still use my Super-E Burner to do it.
Nice. Awesome.
Yep.
I think I have what I need. Thank you so much, Bob.
All right.
Fine. Oh, yeah. I guess my dogs say that we're done. So.
Okay. Very good, sir.
Thank you so much. This was great.
You're welcome. Have a good day. Bye.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.